Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching another episode of the Weaviate Podcast. I'm super excited to welcome Tanmay Chopra. Tanmay has had an incredible career in machine learning from Tik Tok to Neeva and now building his own startup. We have all sorts of exciting topics to discuss like RAG versus fine tuning and all sorts of cool topics around search and machine learning. Tanmay, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Awesome. So, can we maybe tell the story of your kind of career in machine learning, maybe like a helicopter view, and then we could dive in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually chanced upon machine learning about 7 years ago now. Actually, pretty soon after the big Transformers paper that folks talk about all the time. And entirely out of chance, I was doing this internship back in Bangalore, my freshman year of college, and somehow the manager sort of ended up giving me this machine learning project to work on, because no one else in the value chain kind of above me wanted to do it, so it kind of fell to the intern almost, right, as a lot of great things do. And so I was actually fine tuning YOLO v3 to detect hard hats on construction workers, and that's kind of how I got started. I got so excited, doing this project, that on during the week I would sort of do this job, and then on the weekend I would try to train these binary classifiers on my very, very old Mac, none of the M1, M2 stuff. And so it would overheat all weekend, and then get the week to kind of recharge. But yeah, that's how I chanced upon ML. Loved it so much that I kind of just stuck with it, the rest of my life till now.
That's super cool. I started that same way where I wanted to build like a basketball app and I was doing object detection to detect the rim as like a part of my pipeline. I had a 4 gigabyte memory GPU. I can't remember the like 39, and it wasn't a 39. I think that's a pretty good one, but I can't remember the particular anymore. But awesome. So that led you then to TikTok where I understand, I think TikTok has a lot of reputation as, their recommendation algorithm is like super advanced. And so maybe if you could talk about just kind of the machine learning culture at TikTok and how that helped shape your career.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually joined TikTok right out of grad school, and I was on the trust and safety machine learning team. Recommendations for us, by then was a pretty advanced and mature organization. But on the trust and safety side, we were kind of building it out from scratch. So we were able to tap into a lot of their best practices, but also at the same time develop new ones with all the new knowledge that we'd had over the time. I think the big thing that really made TikTok move quickly and deliver sort of cutting edge ML falls into kind of two buckets, right? The first is just the practice of iterating a lot and very quickly. Instead of sort of front loading on hypotheses development and planning, and sort of trying to understand how the world works before touching a single line of code, we'd say, we have these 5 or 10 hypotheses, let's go test them one after the other. And at the root of that sits very strong experimentation software. That's really what's key. And the other thing is, um, continuous improvement, and this is actually really key to machine learning as a whole. When you start out, whether that's a prompt today or a model 3 or 5 years ago, you're not going to be in a great place. But over time you can get significantly better, and primarily by learning from the interactions that your systems are having with your users, with your customers. You fundamentally want to think about where you will be 2 or 3 or 6 months from now, versus sort of being in this paradigm of this is all we've got, right? Our first hit is our only hit. And so I think those two things really made us deliver ML that folks seem to enjoy.
Yeah, it almost makes me want to skip ahead into diving into the fine tuning and the new work you're doing. It's so
Yeah.
interesting, this kind of iterating in that. But if we could just kind of continue on the story. So from TikTok, then you joined Neeva. And I think Neeva is super fascinating. That I remember this whole idea kind of, I think they're like the cohort is kind of like U.com, Neeva, Perplexity, I kind of would put in that category in the early days of, bringing this kind of search engine, taking out the technology, building a new search engine. And that whole like subscription based business model, some of the aspects of Neeva, and then eventually acquired by Snowflake. But I remember following along with Neeva and the blog posts, and there's so many interesting machine learning projects. So maybe if you could then transition into Neeva and how that made you think about search and machine learning.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent quite a while at TikTok. We went from 4 or 5 of us when we started to 40, 200 sort of scale in terms of just machine learning engineers. We have really large machine learning multiple large machine learning orgs, and really wanted to go back to that sort of small, fast, hungry world. And Neeva, to me, the mission was really exciting because it was essentially, and I think all of the search companies are tackling this mission. It's like, can we reimagine the interface between humans and the internet? That's really what it is, right? Whether it's Neeva or Perplexity or U.com or even Google with SGE, that's the question we're asking, right? Can our interaction with the World Wide Web be better? And what does it mean to be better? So I think at Neeva, we thought a lot about search as a business, and we thought a lot about sort of search as capabilities. One of the big things that we focused on, and I think a lot of these companies are also focusing on the new crop, is what happens when you start treating the user as your customer versus the user as your product, and businesses as your customers, right? And then you can start earning trust with users and actually make it feel like the internet, the interface to the internet is their home, versus sort of a venue that they're a guest at, right? Everyone has the same experience when you go to some of the existing search platforms. And the question is, can you make it feel like you're sort of at the center of that universe versus just being exposed to that universe? One of the big challenges in ML when you do search is speed, right? Latency really sits at the heart of the search experience. There's a lot of worlds in which folks will take a not as great experience if it's fast. And we saw that firsthand a lot of times. Um, and that's a big challenge with LLMs today. So we spent a lot of time working on model distillation, and we'll talk more about that in the context of Emissary as well once we get to it. But really, for us, the question was, how do we get it to be as good but faster? um, because the baseline experience was pretty solid. Um, there were a couple of other things on top of this, right? One of the challenges was hallucinations. With
Mm.
search, this becomes a really, really key problem because if folks don't trust the outputs you're giving them, they're going to start clicking into the links. And once you start clicking into the links, like, then we're back to the conventional experience. So there are a couple of these like really interesting challenges. One of the big fundamental challenges, and please stop me if I'm sort of going all over the place, but is temporal reasoning. Language models are actually really bad at reasoning temporally. And normally that's not as big a problem if you think about it. A lot of like documents and a lot of the things we do on a daily basis are temporally independent, right? But search is very, very temporally dependent.
Mm.
One of the queries that we test with all the time is Queen Elizabeth alive? Right, and this is actually a really common question that a lot of ML folks test LLMs with, because when you look that up on the internet, you'll get searches that are like, oh yeah, she's alive, oh no, she's passed away, oh, she's alive. And now you really have to reason over dates and times to be able to generate an answer to that question. And you'll see actually the way you frame that question influences the answer so strongly. So there's a lot of these like fundamental cracks that we're working on and spent a lot of time working on at Neeva as well.
Yes, I really want to keep diving onto temporal reasoning in a lot. Use a lot of great points, and yeah, we're definitely going to come back to knowledge distillation and emissary. But this kind of temporal reasoning, this is something we see all the time in like our Weaviate community channel. Is people asking, "Hey, I want to search with relevance as well as time, and how do I mix the two?" And so my prescription now is just get the top 10 semantic results and then just sort it by the date, but maybe there's more you can, and then when you're prompting it to then hand the search results to the language model, you'd kind of template it like on date, in the curly brackets.
Yeah.
But yeah, so would you say like there is an idea to maybe weighting the score, like you have some kind of recency score, we've seen this kind of exponential decay on the relevance score with the time, or maybe yeah.
100%. And we actually tried this that I think you're mentioning. What's interesting is it's not just that one level, right? So the date or time you have is the date or time that you've created the embedding or indexed the document. Like there's a lot of these like that's a separate date from the dates mentioned in the content. um,
Hmm.
and so that's just not, it's just not one level, it's level at which you discovered information, and then the dates referred to in said information. And so one of the things we tried was we do this thing where it was like on date this, especially for news articles, you always get the date. This content was discovered. But even then, what it really becomes a very complex problem at that stage, because the LLM is now thinking, oh, on date this 2 days ago this happened, so now I have to create an implicit mapping of 2 days ago from this date. And if you're
Hmm.
doing this over 3 or 4 articles, it becomes really challenging for language models. Right, it's a really really complex reasoning problem. I think this is still, I don't have a good answer or solution to this problem yet. I think retrieval in general is a very, very complex space, and there's some really smart people working on it. But I think the community is going to start getting a lot more interested about retrieval once we start getting held to higher and higher standards of accuracy and factuality, which will happen over time, right? It's very natural. We're in our early stages. I think retrieval is going to be a very interesting space. And maybe Weaviate will do some really cool things, right? In that space. So I think a lot of this specific question is still something I don't have a good answer to.
Yeah, I think you brought up the dates within the content. That's quite, yeah, that's quite funny as well. And I guess like I think a lot about like if you have new information that disagrees with old information in your knowledge base, if you want to try to like search for these conflicts and then sort of resolve the conflict and remove the old one from the whole index, or move it to maybe like an archive category or something like this. But so if we could, I really would like, we have two other kind of topics that we've prepared on, and I'm just so curious because Neeva, I imagine so much experience in this. And so this kind of other topic of retrieval diversity, I really want to dive into this. Is like right now, I guess we just have semantic similarity to the query, and then you just get like the top 100 nearest neighbors compared to some kind of like clustering. And so how do you see that kind of diverse? I know give a quick mention, Haystack and Deep Sets Haystack. They have this kind of diversity ranker where they're trying to look for the clusters. And so yeah, how do you see that kind of like diversity in retrieval?
That's actually a really good question, and also linking back to the previous thing you said, and this disambiguation, right? Being able to pull out different threads from clusters of information is going to be really key. We're just starting to play around with this stuff. At Neeva also, we were kind of playing around with the stuff. Some of the guys on my team were doing really great work, because sometimes when you look for a person, and this is where we discovered this problem, there might be two people with the same name, and so you're now retrieving two different threads of information, but they're blobbed together. So how do you disambiguate the different
Mm.
threads? And you can think of them as clusters, right? So I think these are problems we need to dive deeper into. That's one thing. The other is you then take an even bigger hit on latency. This is something to keep in mind, right? Real time use cases. Every time you're adding a stage, you need to ask the question of how do we not just do the stage well? How do we make sure this stage is not a statistically significant change in latency? Because the user doesn't care that you're doing all these complex things at the end. They asked you a question, they expect an answer in a certain amount of time. So in the search paradigm, this is going to be really, really challenging. But I think we're going to find ways to get better at it. Coming to your second question of retrieval, I think an easy win is hybrid search. Right, you
Mm.
definitely need to be looking at the keyword matching world. We were very lucky at Neeva that they built out a search stack before we started doing ML. Right, and this was a huge benefit that folks sort of often will overlook. The reason we were able to do such great machine learning on top of search was because we had incredible search people. And that's what I really say, that like, try not to reinvent everything. Right, if there are things that building blocks that are really strong even outside of AI, we should really be trying to tap into them. Right, one of the bigger sort of manifestations of this is folks trying to use LLMs to do discriminative modeling. Right, if you need a value that's yes or no, you should be using a discriminative model, not sort of an auto-regressive system of any sort. Right, and so there are a lot of these things where sometimes I think we need to take pause and say, is this problem solved already, and in a better way than the way we're trying to solve it? When it comes to retrieval, 100% diversity is going to be key. But again, there is that trade-off. right? You don't want to use too much of your context window with context.
Mhm.
So you don't want too many results, but at the same time, you want these results to be offering different information. One of the things I've been thinking about and playing around with it is, can you represent this information in the form of logic, right? And linguistically independent logic, and then basically just take the key facts. So you take all the context that you have, right, break it down into facts, and then push the facts or the claims into the actual LLM context. And what that lets you do is avoid repetition of information, because if an LLM sees a lot of the same sentence written in different ways, it's going to lean on that piece of information more than the others. So that's again an additional step. So I'm stepping on my own toes here, but there are ways where you can get more intelligent about retrieval. A lot of them involve picking up more than you need and then sifting things down. That's usually a good like framework to think through.
Yeah, that last idea is what really inspired me in this paper called MemGPT, where MemGPT is like prompting it like, here are the search results. What particularly do you want to add to your working context? And yeah, that the facts, I think that's extremely profound. Yeah, retrieval diversity is such an interesting one because it's like, if you cluster the search results, now you have this slowdown where you're clustering, or maybe you calculated it offline, but you have to have like adaptive clustering. I've seen some ideas where maybe you search with, you have your top 100 results, and maybe you search with the seventh, and that gives you diverse queries. or I guess you could rewrite the query and search in parallel.
Yeah, I think a lot of these are challenging because you don't want to miss the good results, right? That's the challenge with diversity. Is like, sure, if you start sampling from the top 100, theoretically you have a wider knowledge base that's covered. But are you going to miss the key question that the user asked, right? Because that could have been in search result two, but two was too close to one. And so you don't want to be bad at standard deviation to from the mean just to try and capture tail queries or head queries. And that's something we thought quite a bit about at Neeva, is like we don't want to compromise mean plus standard deviation one and two just to get onto head and tail.
Yeah, amazing. I think we could just dive into retrieval diversity. There's so much topic, so much to it. But if we could kind of rounding out the search topics, this kind of query recommendation sort of. We were seeing this with ChatGPT. Now you come to ChatGPT and it's got some questions like, how about you want to see the top 10 I don't know, recipes for lasagna? Like, how do you think about this kind of query recommendation, especially as we're seeing more personalization, like chat with your notes, chat with your docs is kind of what queries you want. I see a ton of potential in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually had a beta product back at Neeva, called Gist, where I actually built out the query recommendation system for this product, and a lot of LLM capability was integrated into that. I will say a couple of things about query recommendations, right? So there's two kinds of queries. There's one that you think of as evergreen queries, right? And the idea here is they're exciting today, they're exciting tomorrow, they'll be exciting 5 years from now, probably. So they're more temporally stable in terms of like their interest level. And then there's sort of your temporal queries, right? So news related, outcome related, maybe sport related, and usually users will enjoy a mix of these things. So this is again where diversity is really interesting, right? It's one of those places where retrieval diversity again comes into play. One of the things that I found valuable is thinking about that balance. But also, when it comes to query recommendations, I think personalization is very, very key. Right? It's really simple to say we're just going to give you a bunch of suggestions, and if someone has nothing to do, they'll click on one of them. But the question is, can you create a query recommendation system that people will want to come back to? Right?
Hmm.
Can it be their source of entertainment or their source of infotainment? That's really what we went for. Right? We want users to feel like they're learning something but also having fun. And that's a really hard niche, but it's a really, really valuable niche. And so a couple of tips there. I think categorization helps a lot, right? When you start off, the cold start problem of any sort of recommendation system is really hard. So a good place to start is to categorize, and then go from category to query generation.
Hmm.
Right? So for each category, can we start generating a bunch of queries? and then you can start doing retrieval on the generation. So I would say the right way to sort of play around with this is to have a lot more queries recommended, some way to guarantee, and we did this at Neeva as well, that for any of those queries you have good results. And then which queries do I retrieve for which user? So it's really sort of three stages to that process. And I think that's going to be a really, really big differentiator between a lot of the search folks going forward. So it's definitely worth thinking deeper and deeper about.
Yeah, I also kind of guess I see two perspectives between like Neeva, where you're searching all of the web, and then maybe you're writing queries for like, because I really like this chat with your notes, especially at Weaviate. Kind of it's kind of like I think a lot about people having their personalized knowledge and these kind of systems for your personalized knowledge, and so I love this idea of a more offline, process my notes and help me discover something from my notes that I hadn't considered before. So are you thinking about you kind of would go through, each maybe text chunk of your notes and saying what would be an interesting query for this, and then from there you have, let's say 1,000 queries, you embed them, and then maybe you use something like, in Weaviate we have this thing called ref to vec, where it's like you have three vectors and you add, like if I'm on the search platform and I enter three search queries, I would average the embeddings of those three queries to represent Connor, and then I would do the vector similarity to Connor with maybe these 1,000 queries to recommend the new queries. Does that kind of sound like a system design for this kind of thing?
Yeah, very, very similar design. So if you think about it, it's the same sort of relatively similar stages, right? The only thing that's missing is the categorization. But that's because your category is sort of your personal notes. Although you could also do this categorization there, and be like, oh, is Connor at work right now? Because these are his work queries.
Hmm.
Is he having fun right now? Because those are those queries. And that's really, really helpful, right? Because that takes it from something that's interesting to something that's useful.
Hmm.
Could you give me suggested queries related to the meeting I'm having an hour from now? Is what goes from cool to holy crap, that's useful. Right? And so there are these like small unlocks that you can do, and that's where temporality comes in. What am I doing today? Am I sitting down and opening up my financial landscape, right? Am I doing financial planning today? Great. Can you start suggesting queries that will tell me what my current state of finances is? And so my notes of like, oh, what am I going to invest in a year from now, just pop up. That's what makes it like, to me, magical. Right. And I think there's a lot of scope to do this here. There's a lot of application layer businesses that can be built around connecting my current state to my base of information.
Yeah, I love what you just said about the whole "what am I doing today." It makes me. I love all these like redesigns of note taking software with AI. It sounds like a super ripe opportunity for it, and yeah, to guide the query recommendation with this to do list. So hey, I'm having a really serious day. Don't give me anything fun. Only
Yeah.
useful. Awesome. So Tanmay, that was such an excellent overview, and I think I'm already so impressed with all the knowledge you have on machine learning, and now so this transition from Neeva, starting your own company. Can you kind of tell this intro journey of like the initial problem that you set out to face, and maybe we could go from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure you're probably familiar. Neeva got acquired by Snowflake a short while ago, and to me, I think the AI market is so exciting right now, and it's so nascent, that there's a kind of magic to it that I really wanted to stick around. I'd also just come from a really large tech company to a startup, and really enjoyed that world. And so I set about sort of asking the question of where can I create value in this ecosystem, right? And I will be very transparent. I made a lot of interesting mistakes, going down interesting pathways. Maybe not mistakes, just not best suited pathways for me. Explored a lot of application layer capabilities. And what I really realized was my knowledge base, and my comfort level was a really good fit for infrastructure more than application. One of the things I toyed around was with e-commerce, and very quickly realized, while there's a lot of value to be had there, I don't shop much online. And so I don't really understand the pains and experiences of folks. But I've spent, pretty much all of my adult life around machine learning engineers, and software engineers doing machine learning. That's a pain space I understand pretty well. And the delta that I found there was folks have really good ideas, but are relearning a lot of the mistakes we learned in the ML world in this new Gen AI cycle. And so, can I accelerate that process? Can I, at some level, make AI make sense? Right, that was the big bet. Um, and from my time at TikTok, one of the big pains that I'd realized was really that the biggest value add for ML is just retraining old models on new data. Um, it's as simple as that. Continuous iteration is one of the biggest value drivers in machine learning, but it's also the most painful thing to do. No one gets valued in the team usually for any ML team to retrain old models on new data. Most of the value you get is for building cool new architectural systems, and so that kind of just gets swept under the rug. um, but it's so value creating, and so I asked the question of, can I make this simpler, right? Can I automate that whole process out so machine learning engineers and AI engineers can go do cooler things? But that's obviously a while away for the Gen AI market. The bigger question for the Gen AI market is, how quickly can we go from idea to production ready implementation? Right, and there's a couple of steps there. The first step is turning your AI prompt into an API endpoint, and once you do that, you're basically creating a lot of infrastructure around that. So you're creating some sort of data capture infrastructure, right? How do you keep your vector DBs fresh if you're doing RAG? You're creating monitoring and logging infrastructure, and all solutions for these things exist, but they don't exist in one place. And so that's really what we're creating at Emissary. Our goal is really to create the cockpit for AI native teams and AI native companies. Right? Can they be in one place and monitor all their API endpoints, monitor all of their like vector DBs, because no one's generating one prompt,
Mm.
right? And so when you come to Emissary, you can turn an AI prompt into an API endpoint. You can do versioning over all of it. You can do A/B experimentation over all of it. Logging, monitoring, everything just exists. You hook us up to your regular drive, and we'll provision a vector DB for you and keep it fresh. And when you're ready, and this is really key for us, we'll transition you out of the large language model you're using to your own proprietary model. So model distillation is really where we come and add value, because there's a lot of platforms where you can monitor your prompts. That's great. For us, we think the whole prompt journey is a transitional process. No one's going to stay in the prompt world. You come to the prompt world, you
Mm.
experiment, you iterate, and when you're ready, you go to your own fleet of fine-tuned models, because that's where your like unit economics makes sense. It doesn't make sense to pay 4 cents a request if your system's getting used like 100,000 times a day. um, and if it's not getting used 100,000 times a day, user adoption is your big problem right now. And so you can basically go from this world where you call this huge model that can do a million things down to this one model that does one thing really, really well, but that's the only thing you want it to do. So that's the platform. And then once we distill the capability you want into a small model, we keep that small model fresh over time. So because it's a closed in environment, we're able to do continuous iteration for you just right off the bat. And that's so for us, we're really trying to create this like operating system for the AI world.
Mm.
That's what we're excited about. And we're taking it step by step, but that's the product in a nutshell.
Amazing. There's so much in that, and then operating system. I love that kind of phrasing. That's definitely evolving as a great. So okay. So for my, and I also wish in the introduction I had mentioned that Tanmay's bullish on fine tuning, and because I ask this question a lot. What do you think about fine tuning
Yes.
versus zero shot? And I get a lot of zero shot people because I think the zero shot has done so much for evangelizing AI systems. Yeah, and so I and yeah, but I can definitely see this kind of fine tuning the models to get the better performance, and there's so many kind of particular examples of this. So yeah, so there's so much in that description to unpack. But if we could start with, I think I want to, if we could cover this kind of RAG evaluation is something that I think is picking up a lot as more and more people are using it. They're wondering how is it, like, And so I'm curious about this sort of maybe A/B monitoring and the kind of tooling behind it that maybe if you could have a really simple API that could update your embedding model for you, and then you also have this kind of observability tools is a common thing that like Arise AI uses. They have a great observe how your RAG system is going, and Ragus is another cool one. And so yeah, so I guess that kind of, if we could start on that kind of like embedding, ranking, maybe search model for processing, search because I know you have the search background. I'm very biased in thinking about search, frankly,
Yeah.
but like this kind of like just an API that makes it extremely simple for people to switch to their own custom model and manage it. Could we maybe dive into that a little further?
Yeah, 100%. And I completely agree with you, by the way, on zero shot prompting, sort of evangelizing the space. And I'm very, very glad that it exists because I've been doing ML pre the Gen AI hype, and I've never been this excited about the number of people in the market. Right? It's really unlocked this market for everybody and for software engineers, which is who we're really excited about as well. We really want to see software engineers succeed at pushing AI capabilities into production. And that's really the key unlock. The analogy that I love there to that, and that's one thing I'll say to that debate, is the invention of the 3D printer, right? A 3D printer, if you think about it, can do anything. It can like print anything out, and it's like catalyze this interest in building things that never existed before a 3D printer. But at the same time, when you want to mass produce something, you create a mold out of it and you send it to the production line. You use the 3D printer to iterate, you use the 3D printer to prototype. You'll even use it to maybe make your initial sales, right? And we think that this is exactly what LLMs are to the Gen AI market. We want folks to experiment. We want them to actually even get over the cold start problem. Because for us, pre LLMs, it was really hard to get your initial batch of data. And so it was really hard to train your first model. But that's the big unlock that LLMs have been able to give us. So what we always say to folks is come with your prompt, right? Hook up your prompt to the system. We'll give you a feedback hook. And when it comes to evaluation, this is why I'm bringing this up. Let your users be the judge, right? Um, Let them give you the feedback on what's good output and what's bad output. And once you start learning from that, let us take care of distillation. So that same API endpoint will now become a distilled model that you own. This is proprietary AI that you've built by just coming up with a prompt. And the biggest advantage there is cost and quality. So it's a very simple win on both fronts, right? You don't have to worry about output variability once your model is distilled. It's harder. It's You'll have to redistill when you change the prompt. But while it's in production, it's good, right? You can trust it. You won't get a 3 a.m. call, and this has happened to me, by the way. That like, oh, the pipeline broke down. Like, what's going on, dude? Right? Because the output format changed. So once you start putting LLMs in pipelines, you have this whole other problem of
Mm.
you no longer get to just say the output is cool. It's not a final end user product. So there's a lot of these implicit problems that pop up. And when it comes to evaluation, I think what you really need to look for is a continuous metric, right? The more continuous and implicit your signal. And we'll also talk about sort of the existing RAG metrics, but when you're talking about collecting feedback from users, one thing I'm very, very, very bullish on is implicit feedback. Right? The number of people that actually click a thumbs up or a thumbs down is very low. But what you can look at, and this is what was our big unlock at TikTok, is things like stay duration. Right? I don't need you to press like. If you watch the whole video, it means you probably didn't dislike it too much. Right? And that's kind of one of those big things that I'm hoping software engineers will start thinking more and more about. If you can come up with an idea of what you want to prototype and how you're going to measure whether it's succeeding or not, that's all you should need to do. Um, that's where this infrastructure should come in and say, great, you came up with the idea, you came up with the initial prompt, and you know how to measure the success. Everything else, don't worry about it. Right? And if you want to worry about it as you're learning, one of the things we focus on the platform is also helping people develop more intricate knowledge of metrics and of models and things like that. Open up the back and start playing around with these A/B experiment. If something's better, stick with that thing. um, but you need the tools to be able to do this all in one place if you want to do this. I think a lot of what folks are doing in the RAG evaluation space is contingent on, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, sort of evaluating LLM outputs with other LLMs. That seems to be a very common metric, and I don't think it's a bad idea. Um, I think nothing beats user feedback. The only moat in ML, I won't speak for AI just yet. I'm still learning a lot. The only moat in ML used to be interactions, right? We called it data, but it was really just interactions because everyone can go buy the same raw data. But can you collect your own proprietary data? Used to be a real moat. And I think interactions through feedback is also going to be a very meaningful moat for the AI market.
Yeah. Again, so much in that. It's just fantastic. And so I okay, so that 3D printer analogy just really stood out to me. I haven't heard that before, and I really like it. But well, so I think with this kind of fine tuning of the language model, if we kind of stay in that category instead of also putting fine tuning embeddings and ranking in the same kind of category and sort of making it unclear what we're talking about, but this kind of like distillation of the model, it has the obvious benefit of now it's smaller, less parameters, and thus your margins are better, it's cheaper, easier, all that, and that's fantastic. And a really interesting thing that Jerry Liu had published at Llama Index is like evaluating the open source language models. Like there are these advanced query engine things in Llama Index like SQL router or multi-hop question decomposition, and Jerry was saying, here's how all these open source models, the smaller, cheaper ones, here's like the green check, red X of what query engines they can follow. And I've been very interested in tool use, API formatting with like the Gorilla large language models, and so that's another case where you can compress it, and then it's way more economical. But the thing I really want to dive in on in the 3D printer analogy is this kind of like if I'm trying to get my language model to be able to have this conversation, right? Like speak to me this intelligently about machine learning, like am I going to be able to fine tune a model you know compared to like GPT-5? That I think that's the big question, because I don't know if the 3D printer, because it's not like printing little plastic like gears. It's quite the language model. So yeah, that would maybe to maybe pause the question before handing it back yeah, can we fine tune models that are as powerful as GPT-5, say?
Really good question. I think part of that I can't comment on because we don't know what GPT-5 will look like. Right. But we can ask the question of what does it mean to have a new generalized system? And we both started our careers in object detection, so I'll lean into that a little bit. YOLOs are great, right? There was a V3 when I started. There's now like a V10. And they're not identical to generative models, but they're pretty generalized. When they come out of the bat, they can do 10,000 classes, or used to be able to do 10,000 classes, right? And even then, every new YOLO didn't mean that your verticalized models were no longer useful. What it did was set a new benchmark from which your verticalized models could build on top of.
Mm.
And that's what we tell a lot of folks who are thinking about these decisions is um, your distilled model doesn't stop learning. So if GPT-5 comes out tomorrow and it's so much better than everything else, great, route it back to GPT-5 for the first 10, 20,000 requests. Obviously start by A/B experimenting. Don't just move your 100% of your traffic to GPT-5. But start by learning there, and then this distilled model will now become the new, it'll build off that new benchmark. The advantage that you have with distilled models is they're not frozen in stone. They can always get better on top of the most cutting edge LLM. But also when 5 comes out, if it is bigger, and that's a supposition, um, it'll be more expensive. There are fundamental costs associated with running LLMs that are setting a floor on the cost. Right now, a lot of these operations are subsidized. Right, even at 4 cents a request or whatever, it's probably still not breaking even. Is what I'm hearing. I could be completely wrong, but it's still not even breaking even. And so, how valuable do you think your AI feature is going to be to your users? is a really important question to ask. Not all AI features are built equal. It's very unlikely that someone would pay $5 for a single summary, right? Um, so how much can you charge? And then how much is it going to cost you to run these large models? You have to be doing that napkin math. Maybe you don't do it today, but you do it in 6 months. And so there is that big concern of, are we doing this in a manner that's sustainable? And I would always encourage people to ask that question.
Yeah. Another podcast that I'm really proud of is when we had Rohit Agarwal from Portkey, who's doing like a LLM load balancer between the APIs, and that kind of A/B testing the particular tooling. I find that really fascinating. Yeah, so I don't mean you. You're really painting the picture, and I agree with the knowledge. So I don't mean to be. I agree with you actually. With my,
No,
I'm just trying to like get the other arguments out, and I really want to say is like. So I think this kind of integration of the user feedback with gradient descent. It sounds very like obviously that would be super strong, right? But then I'm also curious about like if you can kind of tune like there's this other idea that you can tune the prompts or maybe add more knowledge to your retrieval database in RAG, and then that's like another way to tune it with the feedback. It's not, it's not as direct as putting gradients through it, but you could probably there's probably something you can do, right, where you just kind of tune the prompts. Yeah.
yeah, 100%. And I think those things are quite promising, I will say. One of the things we do on our platform, and I encourage everyone to do, is actually look at all options. Right, fine tuning might not always be the right option, and a lot of folks are pointing this out now, which is a good thing to do. The thing we want to do is empower people to understand the difference in cost and quality. That's it. Right, I want you to be able to say, this is my total cost of ownership, this is my total cost of ownership. How much do I want to pay? This is the quality I'm hitting at here, and this is the quality I'm hitting at here. There will be use cases. I think we're trying to generalize the whole AI market a lot, and I might be guilty of this too. But there will be a world where fine tuning will be cheaper and better. There will be a world where prompting will be cheaper and better. What we need to do is have those options on the table, which means having this infrastructure to distill, having this infrastructure to A/B experiment, and having this infrastructure to capture feedback. If we can bring these things together, then we can start making more intelligent decisions about these things. I think a big part of building an infrastructure company is not being highly opinionated about the outcomes of a specific use case. And so we just want to give people the tools to make those decisions. And yeah, I think, um, sorry, am I missing something from what you called out, or?
Oh no, that was perfect, and I agree completely with what you said. Yeah, and use case dependent. That makes sense. There's already just the formatting the tool use, like the Gorilla kind of lesson that already makes your case for that thing. And I think the only question that people are still trying to wrap their heads around is like kind of the general reasoning engine thing, and I think that one is like because that Falcon 180B, I guess maybe you would have thought that they would or even like the llama models that they would fine tune that, and then now we've got back to the old world of like bio BERT, legal BERT, where it was like the domain expertise BERT. Like I don't think that quite happened with the general reasoning yet, but yeah, that kind of prompt to model, I find it so fast. Yeah.
I think here I will say one thing. The market is still, and I keep harping on this for a very specific reason. The market is still so nascent, that we're not really looking at the standards we will be held up to commercialize a lot of this. Right? Demos are fantastic, and they create excitement, and they create a lot more research, and they catalyze activity. But willingness to pay comes with a very much higher standard of performance. So even though we might not be seeing it today, and this is not my term, I kind of stole it from somebody else. But what that person said, and I really value this, is there's a lot of tuition money floating around in the AI market today. Right, when you pay tuition to go to one of these colleges, six-figure tuitions, or private schools, you're not paying for what you're getting. You're paying for being able to say that you went there. And
Mm.
right now, a lot of businesses are in this mode where they're paying to be able to say they're an AI, right, or using AI or evaluating AI. The question will come pretty soon of like, can you charge your customers for this? Right, and that's where we'll see a lot of performance squeezing happen. Right now, we're exploring possibilities, but once we find the ones that are valuable, we're going to see a lot of performance squeezing come into play. So I think there's two separate stages of this journey, and we're still to reach a big part of the second.
Yeah. So I'm really sold on it. I think you make extremely great points. And so now my question is the fleet of models. We're very curious about this, like what's the future of databases? And so, Hugging Face brands themselves as the GitHub of machine learning models. I know that you have some ideas about LoRa fine tuning and how you have the sparse weight matrix. What's the best way to manage a fleet of small models?
We're hoping it'll be us. That's the hope. I can't promise it'll be us, but I do hope so. I think both on the data side and the model side, we hopefully will start asking this question a lot more of why, right? We are going through this journey of it's great to store everything you can store, um, but hopefully we transition to a world where we say, okay, we need this data for X, right? And usually you use data for two big reasons. One is to generate insights, and the other is to generate experiences. Um, and so maybe we'll transition to this world, and this is more a hope than a prediction, of we need to create this experience. What data do we need for it? Let's start collecting it. We need this insight, right? We need to know, are people happier in the morning or evening? Let's start measuring their happiness in the morning and evening, instead of saying, oh, why don't we also measure every 60 minutes their happiness, which is kind of what we do today. um, because once we start thinking about we're collecting data for this purpose, the way we structure and store that data will become so much more important, right? If you know why you're using data right now, and this is laughed at across the ML space, right? Most ML engineers spend most of the time data engineering, right? Or most data engineering teams are larger than ML engineering teams, and there's all these funny graphs about data scientists spending time cleaning data. um, all of this exists because we think about why we're going to use data after we store it. If we can invert that flow, right? And that's a big bet for us at Emissary as well. We're saying, look, we'll give you the data, we'll store the data for you in a manner that you can use. In this case, the purpose is fine tuning models or measuring feedback deltas. We're not just going to log everything we can log, because that's just going to be a dump. And actually, at TikTok and a lot of big machine learning companies that have been doing this for a while, even though you have large logs of data before, and this is actually part of our project design, right? Before you train the model, you collect the data in the format that you expect it to go into the model for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So we're also already implicitly doing this practice at the places where this has been happening for a while, because you need to be able to guarantee that when you train this model on X data pipeline is already reliable and consistent. So that's my bet for how that data storage market or model storage market transitions.
Yeah, I really like that. That kind of that's why I really like the kind of GitHub for machine learning analog. You know how you have like the GitHub Actions and all that good stuff. And so I imagine a new machine learning model will go through a similar kind of checks and all that. And yeah, I guess like because like that kind of question, like with Weaviate, it's kind of like with vectors, and it's like vectors are the new data type, and so we're designing a database for this new data type. And I'm curious, like if model weights could be a new data type, or maybe it's another kind of vector that has a sort of annotation to how you would project it into the transformer. And yeah, just so many interesting ideas. Sort of, Tammy, wrapping up the podcast, sort of, I'd love to ask you this kind of future looking question, like what on the horizon excites you the most?
Yeah, I think I'm really excited to see which application layer businesses transform life experiences. It's a bit vague, but I'm very bullish on AI actually being able to make people's lives better. I think there's a lot of fear around, and very justified fear around. But to me, this vision of AI making everyone a supervisor is really exciting, right? Can we promote everyone one layer up their job? Right. So instead of now summarizing an article, if that's what you do on a daily basis, you assign or delegate a model to do that, and you delegate a model to do everything else, and you
Mm.
basically become a verifier. So that's a future I'm really, really excited about. And that is contingent on us having these building blocks that are super, super reliable. But if we can do that, my hope is we can fundamentally improve the human experience. So that's what I'll leave you with.
Love it. Tanmay, thank you so much for joining the podcast. There's so many interesting ideas in here, and it's concrete, and it is a really an amazing end to end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.